introduction, as stated, my name is Meredith Dank. I'm a research professor at John Jay College in New York City. About 2.5 years ago, the Human Trafficking Institute, who you will hear from a little later today, had reached out asking myself and my colleagues to put forth a proposal to do a prevalence estimate of trafficking in Kampala, Uganda. I won't go into all the details now because that's what my panelists will be doing. But I wanted to focus this specific panel on kind of the project as a whole, particularly with what we experienced with COVID last year. So the first presenter, Dr. Kyle Vincent, will go through the methodology, particularly when it comes to the prevalence estimation. And we'll talk a little bit about the populations that we focused on. The second presenter, Andrea Hughes, will be discussing some overall findings, preliminary findings from both the survey, of which we surveyed over 1,700 individuals, and qualitative interviews, of which we did about 140 qualitative interviews. The third presenter would be the person who was leading the field team in Kampala, Uganda, Mutaawe Rogers, and he's going to cover the ethical considerations that we all had to take into consideration when doing not only research with such a vulnerable population, but also during COVID-19 and restrictions around that. And then our last presenter, Alyssa Currier, who is from the Human Trafficking Institute, will talk about their work and why they commissioned a prevalence study in Kampala, Uganda. So the first person that is going to kick things off is Dr. Kyle Vincent. I'm just going to read a couple of lines from your bio, since everybody's bios are extensive and we want to make sure that we cover everything. Kyle is an independent researcher and statistical consultant. He has been involved in an array of studies that aim to characterize hidden populations, such as those comprised of forced laborers, trafficking victims, commercial sex workers, and drug users. These experiences have motivated his research on developing innovative strategies that can be used to efficiently study such populations. Such strategies typically rely on peer recruitment, network sampling designed to access and observe individuals cannot be reached with conventional approaches. Basically, if you see any prevalence research going on specific to the issue of human trafficking these days, most likely you will see Dr. Kyle Vincent's name attached to it. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Kyle.
Okay, thank you very much, Meredith. Great introduction. I'm going to share my screen here and get started. So there we are. I trust everybody can see this okay. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it. Go ahead.
Excellent. Okay. So I think the audience is familiar with the study, and it's on the statistical part of it. I've labeled as an application of a hybrid strategy to study a hidden population in Uganda. So the focus of the study here, the primary objective was to characterize the study population, which has been defined to be those individuals engaged in sex work and also forced to forced to beg and sell goods in a particular region of Uganda. This is often, such populations are often deemed hidden or hard to reach populations. They're difficult to access, they're difficult to find or recruit for study purposes. So oftentimes when that's the case, hidden populations are often best accessed through a peer referral design. The idea here is once you've sampled at least one individual from the study, you can get them to go out and bring some of the individuals from their personal network into the study. And you can build up the network sample that way. The idea here was to base the sampling design, the overall sampling design, on a combination of what's called respondent-driven sampling and venue-based observations. So one here is an innovative strategy that relies on peer recruitment, and the other one is based on a more conventional approach where the field workers will go to venues and do some sort of subsampling to make observations. What we do here is we draw on the strengths of these two methods to obtain a good sample. With one design, we might expect to get deep penetration into the population for good coverage, but we might miss some of those who are a little more attached to venues. So that's why we decided to augment the RDS sampling design with the venue-based observations. Also, what we could do here is we can get estimates based on RDS, which is respondent-driven sampling. We can also get independent estimates based on the venue-based observations, and then we can actually get estimates based on both approaches combined. Because of the pandemic, we had two stages or phases of data collection. First one here, this is a visual illustration of what happened with the respondent-driven sampling design. We were able to observe 763 individuals just before data collection was suspended. And what we have are a set of nodes that represent the individuals, and then there's sample paths or links. There's actually arrows in there to show who's referring who. And those enlarged nodes represent the seeds for the respondent-driven sampling design. They're color-coded by the study regions that we investigated. After data collection resumed, we were able to go out and sample another 1,024 individuals. So as you can see, here's a similar visual illustration. So there's a lot of RDS trees. You might have caught that. And we decided to use a generous number of seeds for this design for reasons coming up. Okay, so the reason why we use so many seeds in contrast to what a typical respondent-driven sampling design would be based on is so that we could access potentially disjoint areas of the population. We anticipated that there would be a lot of clustering and it might be hard for individuals to refer other individuals of different demographic profiles. So that's why we decided to have such a generously sized number of seeds as well as overall sample size. Interestingly, some of the RDS trees branched out over 10 waves, so the design worked very well when studying this population. With respect to sample weighting to generate point estimates and standard errors for population quantities, we resorted to using a popular RDS weighting scheme referred to as the Volt-Heckerthorn method. And we also based population size estimates on what's called a successive sampling scheme that was developed by Mark Hancock and his colleagues. We also ran a comparison analysis of the responses of individuals observed with the first and second stage of data collection. We found some very interesting results. There were some differences in network sizes with respect to how they were comprised of some individuals, but not others. I won't get into all the details, but I believe that this will be reflected on in the final report. With respect to the venue-based study, the field team went out and enumerated all the venues where they expected the study population to congregate so that we had a sample frame of these venues. The idea here was to sample some of these and to make observations and counts of individuals in the study population that are attached to these venues. And we used the conventional post-stratification procedure to account for the heterogeneity and the selection mechanisms of these guys here. The idea here was this way we could extrapolate over all the venues to obtain estimates for characteristics of the study population. So we had a second class of estimators for this population here. Finally, because we did two studies, what we did was we also asked the venue-based respondents if they participated in the RDS survey. This allowed us to make counts based on the number of individuals that were surveyed twice, once for the RDS study, once for the venue-based study. And when you do this, this gives rise to what's known as a mark recapture procedure. This can allow one to make an estimate of the population size. So we had three classes of estimators for our study population, and reported all of these, I believe. And there are several limitations when studying human populations. I certainly think it's most worthwhile to note that it was the pandemic, this one, because there was such a disturbance in the population. And there was a period of time between the two phases of data collection. So this could certainly cause some sort of disruption or a disturbance in the population and the way it's networked. So anyhow, that's all for my presentation. I have two references here, and so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And just so folks know, I realized I neglected to say when these findings will be available for you all to read, and that will most likely be late summer, early fall. So a lot of these discussions and findings are still preliminary. We are still analyzing the data to some degree, but I do encourage everybody to go ahead and add any questions that you have in the Q&A box. If we can answer them, we will absolutely try to do so. And just one more point of clarification is that the populations ultimately that we did end up studying in the Kampala district are those individuals engaged in the sex trade and children who are forced to beg and sell goods. And the idea was to determine of those two broad populations, understanding there's going to be some overlap, how many people are actually being trafficked. So just a little bit more context there. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Miss Andrea Hughes, who is a research associate at John Jay College of Criminal Justice along with me. She focuses on primarily on human trafficking in addition to domestic violence. She has served as a research associate and project manager for multiple research projects on sex and labor trafficking and domestic violence. She is a licensed social worker with extensive experience supervising programs that serve survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, and homicide, and was incredibly helpful, particularly in helping us navigate some of the information that we were bringing in and working, as Mutaawe will also discuss, with some of the research assistants on some of the information that they were learning from the participants, which were oftentimes hard to hear and in some cases see. So without further ado, I will then pass it along to Andrea.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith. And thank you everyone for having us here today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to take some time to go over just our very preliminary analysis of our findings. We are at the very beginning stages of our analysis. So what I'll be sharing today are frequencies only, but it will give you a pretty good snapshot and idea of the results of our study and some of the characteristics of the populations that we were looking at. Hold on one second, I'm sorry about that. Okay, to start off with, I just want to go over some demographics. We have 25.1% are male participants, and 74.8% were female. The majority of the female participants did come from the sex work sample. And the overall sample of the study, as Meredith mentioned before, was 1,787. The sex work sample size was 1154. And the forced begging selling sample was 543 participants. And so you'll see that the sample size, the general sample size, is a little bit larger than the sex work sample and the forced begging selling sample, because 70 of the participants actually identified as experiencing both. And so we separated those out and did not include them in the individual sample size. Okay, for age group 17, we had 31.9% were 17 and younger. The majority of these young people actually came from the forced begging population, because we were looking only at children for that, for those individuals. So we were looking at individuals who are as young as 10 years old. And so about 60% came from that group. And the majority of the sex worker sample size were ages 18 to 25. And then 21.4% of all of the entire sample were ages 26 and 40, and only a very small percent were ages 41 and older. In terms of marital status, the majority of the participants were single or separated, and the remaining like 10% of the participants not included here, they were all in had some sort of relationship status, where they're married or dating somebody. And then, as you can see, the majority of the participants here have some sort of education. So 60% were primary, 27.3 were senior O level 1 through 4. So they all had some education, just not a lot, but had some, and only 5.3% had no education at all. Okay. So why participants chose to start working outside the home? So I pulled out the top 5 reasons individuals started working outside the home. So the first is peers lured or convinced them to start working outside the home, and that was at 19%. And 22% of individuals left home because of mistreatment. There was a significant amount of physical abuse and sexual abuse in the home, and they left for that reason. You can see that 19.5% of individuals dropped out of school, and that percent remains true for both sex work sample and individuals who are forced to beg and sell. To help with household bills, and individuals left to look for work. So there was definitely like a financial component, where 30% of the participants left home specifically to look for work, and 15% left to help because they needed help with household goods. And I just want to point out that for those who were involved in sex work, that 34.7% left the home to look for work, compared to 23% of the young people who were forced to beg and sell. So there was a noticeable difference there. And I wanted to pull these other 2 variables out as well, because there's definitely some differences between populations here. So where it's not a huge part of the sample, those who are asked by parents to work and forced by parents to work, certainly those individuals who were forced to beg and sell reported that at a greater percent than those who were in sex work, which makes sense because this was a younger population. Okay, one of the participants, these are coming from our qualitative interviews. One of our participants, a 12-year-old female who experienced forced begging and selling, she explained, "I came to accompany my mother in the business of sorting cereals in the market in order to increase the degree of earning to sustain our family. But when there's no work to do in the market, my mother tells me to go and beg on the street." So there is a component of being asked to work in terms of selling items, and then also being forced when it comes time to being forced to beg on the street. So who introduced or pressured individuals into doing this kind of work? So again, some of these top items or people that our population that we were studying knew. So father, 2.4%, mother, 7.8%. Their mother was the one that introduced or pressured them into work. Other older relatives, that was at 9.2%. And what many people reported that their friends were actually the ones that introduced or pressured them into doing either sex work or forced begging and selling. And you can see here that the sex worker sample, those who were experiencing sex work or sex trafficking, 69% reported that their friends got them involved. And then again, like for forced begging and selling, those individuals, it was their family members mostly. Notably, I think when people think about human trafficking, they often think that maybe an employer or stranger is the one that would introduce or pressure on this work. But very, very, very few people reported that an employer or stranger were the ones that introduced them into this work. Okay, so one 21-year-old female participant who experienced sex trafficking, she said, a friend of my auntie brought me here. If she had not brought me, I would not have done this job. Maybe I would be in the village digging for people as a way of getting school fees, because here I see myself dying. First of all, I contracted HIV/AIDS. We get syphilis, infections, candida, and those other illnesses. That is second. The third illness that I see coming, if I don't fight for myself, is death. So she was trafficked by a friend of her auntie, and very clearly very, very distressed and ill, and does not want to be doing this kind of work. So another aspect of human trafficking is that participants are forced to work even after they refuse. So 41.3% of the total sample said that they were forced to work after they refused. And 36% of sex workers said that, and 52.5% of individuals who were forced to beg or sell, understandably, were forced to work after they refused. So what would happen if they did refuse, some would experience 27.9% experience physical violence, 12.3% were physically restrained, including being tied or locked up in a room. 32.3% were deprived of food, water, or sleep. 23.2% experienced emotional violence. 12.5% experienced loss of wages. 17.9% said that there were no better job options. And 18.6% said nothing would have happened. And I just want to note here that this loss of wages and no better job options, this financial aspect of it was a little bit higher than for those who experienced sex work compared to those who experienced forced begging and selling. And then the physical violence was reported at 41.9% for the young people who were forced to beg and sell, compared to the sex work sample at 21%. So one 19-year-old female who experienced sex trafficking explained that if she refused to work, that she would kill me. I cannot refuse. She can beat me up. She forces us. And a 17-year-old male who experienced forced begging and selling said, yeah, at times I may be feeling weak and I don't want to go to work and I'm just forced. Like she yells at me and tells me if I don't go to work, I won't get food. Both of these individuals were trafficked by family members. So in addition to experiencing abuse, if they refuse to work throughout their work experience, they experience additional abuses. So 55%, a little over 55% experienced wages being deducted against their will. 70% were intimidated at some point by shouting or smashing things. 58% were punched, kicked, dragged, or beaten up. 33.5% were forced to drink alcohol or use illegal drugs. And 38% were forced to kiss, cuddle, or perform intimate touching. And 31% were forced to perform oral, vaginal, or anal sex. And the majority of those are in sex work samples. So the participants, one 22-year-old female sex trafficking victim explained that sometimes we get people who hit us after serving them, but those are the things we get in the bar. And still at this new bar, my boss is not good. He abuses us. He's so rude. He screams at you for not doing something to the customer. If you do not work because you have a problem, he deducts that money and says he's not going to pay you because you have not worked. And still he forces you to sleep with other men. And lastly, we just wanted to look at briefly why participants continued working, given these, abusive situations, because a very high number, 92.5% of the sample said that they continued working and did not leave their jobs. And so 16% said they continued working because they would experience physical violence. 24% said that they would be deprived of food, water, or sleep. 13.5% would experience emotional violence. 19% would experience loss of wages. And 49.3% said that there were no better job options. And so they unfortunately had to make a decision between two very bad choices. An 11-year-old female who was forced to beg and sell, when asked if she ever tried to leave her aunt's place without permission, she said no, because she could not allow it. I'm the one who does the homework and also getting the money aunt uses. So in case I try to leave her place, she can search for me in every corner until she finds me. And when she gets me, she can beat me to death. So in closing, I just wanted to add a couple of other quotes to show that how important the research is to the participants as well. There were a number of people who expressed that it was important work, even though it was hard for them to participate and to speak to us, to speak to Mutaawe's team in Uganda. So the 24-year-old female sex trafficking said at the end of her interview, this research that you're doing is not bad. It is good because I'm requesting, if it is possible, continue researching, because there are other people, many, who are like me, and they would want to share their conversation with you and get a way of helping them. A 19-year-old female sex trafficking says, I'm requesting that you spread this news to those responsible. I'm asking that I also be like the youth with a good life. Help us send our voice to those responsible if you can. And a 17-year-old male who experienced sports begging and selling says, you come to us, as you said, and see how we are. Let the government come and help us. Let the voices reach. And thank you very much. No, stop sharing screen now.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I can't tell you the amount of information that we are going through is tremendous. The individuals, as Mutaawe will talk a little bit about, that were part of the study, particularly the qualitative interviews, shared so much about their lives and experiences that this is just a quick snapshot. And so I'm going to turn to Mutaawe Rogers, who is a social worker and a senior program manager with Uganda Youth Development Link, and was our primary partner on the ground for this particular project. And without him and his team, we would have absolutely no data to present to you today. He has implemented direct community interventions aimed at prevention and rescue of victims of human trafficking in communities through engagement with leaders and stakeholders, both at national and local levels. He has provided counseling care and rehabilitation services to survivors, and has conducted awareness sessions with stakeholders in the justice, law, and order sector. Without further ado, again, I'm going to turn it over to Mutaawe Rogers, who is going to talk to you a little bit about what it was like to collect this data on the ground and all the ethical considerations they had to develop protocols for and things of that sort in order to do this above board. And without further, here we go. Go ahead, Mutaawe.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for the introduction. I want to go ahead and try to share my presentation. I don't know if I can see it from here.
Let me know if you want me to do it.
Maybe you can do it from your side to save time.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second. No, now. Here we go. Let me just pull it over here, and we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. Okay, here we go.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for the organizers of this conference. This is a good time to be able to share some of our field experiences and lessons from the first begging and trafficking research study that we did in Kampala. But I also want to extend our sincere thanks and regard to the team, especially from Human Trafficking Institute and also John Jay College for having trusted us as an organization, Uganda Youth Development Link, to participate and be on the ground to be able to undertake this study. So I'll be able to give you some highlights from our field experiences. I know the previous speakers have been able to talk to you about the different scenarios that we've gone through and the statistics. Some of the ethical considerations here for the study, one is that the protocol was approved by the Makerere University School of Makerere University School of Social Sciences Ethics Research Committee, as required by the laws and by regulations governing research in this country. But also, we also have to seek further approval from the Uganda National Council for Science and Technology, because that's how the approvals move. So we're able to go through the different phases and the different scenarios, and we're able to go through, and the study was approved by the relevant authorities in Uganda. But also, we, as part of protocol, as part of ethical considerations, we also sought informed consent from all respondents. So whatever data that has been presented previously, we sought informed consent from all the respondents. Those who didn't want to participate, we are left out. We are not coerced. We are not coerced to participate in the study. Yes. When we came to commencement of data collection exercise, we recruited and trained 19 research assistants and 2 research supervisors to support the data collection exercise. I know we had teams from the US coming down here to train in 2019 before this lockdown came in and COVID and everything. So we had a good cordial working relationship to understand how we are going to be able to go to the field and the different scenarios, playing out different scenarios of how we shall be able to collect the data. But we also had qualitative data collection team, which was trained in interviewing and also transcription. Of course, as part of the training, we also had to do a pilot study in one of the districts in Mukono at 2 of the UDO safe spaces, where we were able to interview 70 victims of sex trafficking at the time. And the feedback we got from this pilot study really helped to modify the survey, the instrument, but also to understand how to be able to ask the questions when it comes to the actual data collection exercise. So we really got quite some good information and feedback from the research assistants, and we were able to change a few things here and there, especially as far as the items in the survey was concerned. When it comes to the study, we distributed the research assistants to 25 hotspots, because we had hotspots which are spread across the 5 regions of Kampala, and therefore we had to distribute the research assistants based on some of the hotspots which are a little bit accessible for them, given the areas of residence, so that it can be a little bit easier for them to move. Because given as you see later, that we had different times, because different respondents require different times of interviewing and conducting and contacting them. A total of 138 qualitative interviews were done, and I know that in our protocol we had hoped to get 125. That was our plan, to get 125 qualitative interviews, but we got, I think, an excess of 13 qualitative interviews, which is good because it helps to enrich the study. And we also have interviewed 1,787 quantitative surveys, which are almost 287 in excess of what we had planned of 1,500. So which we think that it can really give us some good base for us to be able to really ground our study and ground our findings that we are sharing tonight. When I go to the field experiences, some of the cases that we interviewed, that we found in the field, needed immediate rescue and psychosocial support, given the circumstances they're facing at the time. But of course, as study protocol couldn't allow us to be able to do some of immediate rescue and psychosocial support, because it was again the study protocol. And but of course, as time has gone on, I think like last month, we're able to go back to the field to be able to understand, to be able to try to trace some of the respondents who needed some of the immediate rescue services at the time. But given the challenge, given the population that we are serving and that we really interviewed, it's a mobile population, so they keep moving from one place to another. So where we would expect maybe to find them in one hotspot, you find that probably some of them have left and moved to another hotspot, and you can't really trace where they are. And yet we thought that these are very good case studies that we needed to follow up and give some services. But on going back to the field recently, you find that most of them have moved. But of course, it's as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced many of these vulnerable groups to either go back to rural areas or to migrate and move to cheaper places where they can stay. So that has been a little bit of a challenge as per now. Some of the respondents were hidden by the employers and only escaped to come from their homes or from their communities to come and conduct the interviews with the support of key community contacts. So this is typical that, you know, if one of the employers, for example, if you're working in a bar or a lodge, a brothel, or probably you are one of the perpetrators who is trying to use the young boys or girls into forced begging, they may not allow them really to come and give us information, participate in some of the studies, because they know what they're doing is wrong. But sometimes we find that because of our contacts that we had in the communities, they helped us a lot to be able to identify some of these cases from where they had been hidden. Some research assistants were affected by vicarious trauma, which was caused by listening to stories, which were very traumatizing because of the suffering and violence the respondents had gone through. Yes, this was quite a very big challenge in as far as the study was concerned, that really we didn't envisage some of these issues to happen, but somehow some of the research assistants really had out of vicarious trauma. But eventually, when these experiences were shared with us, we managed to liaise with the team from John Jay College, and we've managed to do at least 2 trainings on vicarious trauma with the research assistants. We had one in March and also had a follow-up one in April. And we also think that, but we've also encouraged other research assistants who are part of the study team to come to us, and we've been able to talk to 1 or 2, 3 who have been able to reach us at the office, and to be able to continue counseling them, to continue giving them hope, also to see that they really overcome the challenges that they've been able to go through. The other thing is that time for the interview matters, because different respondents in forced begging probably could prefer during the daytime. Some of them, they give you time, which is really, which is.
I think you're breaking up, Mutaawe. We'll give him maybe 1 more minute to see if he can connect.
Okay, thank you.
Beauty of unstable Wi-Fi connections.
I think that was a
Oh, there you go. We can hear you now.
yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next slide just because we're running a little out of time. Yeah,
fine. Okay. The other issue to consider here is the outbreak of the global outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to suspension of data collection at the end of March 2020. Of course, has been an issue globally, and we can't really run away from it, but it's been part and part of us. But at least we're able to resume data collection after August, upon lifting some of the lockdown measures at the time. From post-lockdown, some of the forced begging respondents resorted to door-to-door for forced begging or forced selling of goods other than the streets, because they found that this was a more effective way for them to be able to sell some of their goods that they had. But also, we find that even those who are involved in sex trafficking, the respondents who are involved in sex trafficking, resorted to getting clients online using social media platforms, either Facebook or WhatsApp. So since the bars and the lodges and the hotels have largely remained closed, and therefore and these are some of the places they used to access their clients. So they've really moved to online social media platforms to access clients. Some of the respondents used to come to the interviews were high on drugs. Some of them were drunk, because given the hotspots and the respondents we are looking out for, these are some of the issues that they really present. But of course, there are also others who came and who are giving us false information in order to receive incentives. But of course, when this was noted, we couldn't really go ahead with interviews with some of these cases or respondents who presented this kind of behaviors. Of course, we also had challenges that there are instances of noisy and conducive hotspots with the revelers or even patrons who are accessing those places in a given on a particular day. So because if this is a hotel, maybe it's a brothel, or where people really are using them for their own other work, so you find that sometimes they have some bit of inconveniences here and there. In terms of lessons learned, I know a previous speaker talked about the capture and recapture methodology. This helps us a lot in reaching more respondents, which initially we didn't think we would be able to reach, because we're able to reach out to as many as possible, but also being able to capture to know that this person has been interviewed or not interviewed before. The respondents, as we said earlier, respondents also had a lot of trauma, had a lot of trauma, and hence we needed a component of referral to psychosocial support and services at the time, because we didn't have it envisioned in the research protocol. But I think it was imperative that we needed to. There are some cases that we needed some immediate rescue, and we couldn't do it at the time. We're also proposing some of the lessons. We say that we need to develop a risk mitigation plan. How do we do immediate rescue for some of the respondents? For example, some respondents who had presented issues of suicide, and you can't live, and it was really heartening to leave such a respondent in the field without really necessarily helping them at that point in time, because they need services there and then without necessarily waiting. But again, we need to jeopardize the research protocol, which we think that going forward, future studies have to look into this. Of course, we also used to have daily briefs between the management team and also research assistants, which helps us to discuss different experiences which are happening daily, but also to be able to come up with the ways of overcoming some of the changes that we are finding in the field. Of course, we also deployed more than one research assistant per hotspot for safety purposes, because given the areas where we're working in, which is some of them were in the slum areas, some of them were in the streets, and so it was really, we couldn't really deploy one such assistant per hotspot. So at least we try to deploy 2 such assistants per hotspot for purposes of safety, and also to give each other encouragement, but also to support each other when it comes to data collection. But also we used a lot of key contact persons in the community, especially the students. Some of them, they call them street uncles, who helped us to access places which we didn't have access. Because the street uncles, for example, have been former street children, and so they know the places, they know the areas, they know the local leadership in the community, and therefore somehow they help you to navigate the area, but also help you to reach out to places which you wouldn't have reached out. So they kind of helped us to have a leeway in the communities which we participated in and which we found, which we did the survey. But also it's important, we think that it's important to have a vicarious trauma counselor on the team to support research assistants going forward when future studies are being conducted, because some of these presenting issues need professional services, need expert services for us to be able to support research assistants, because it will not be good for research assistants to go to the field collecting data, but at the same time that they're not feeling well. They're not behavior-wise, their thoughts, their feelings are not in tandem with the research. So we think it's important to have a counsel on the team going forward. So yes, I think those are some of our issues that we're able to get, and which I think that we've been able to share, and we can learn more. And also, so thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mutaawe. And last, but certainly not least, we are going to hear from Ms. Alyssa Currier-Wheeler, who is an associate legal counsel for the Human Trafficking Institute, which, as I had stated earlier, were the ones funding the research, where she oversees human trafficking prevalence studies in Belize and Uganda. She also co-authors HTI's annual federal human trafficking report, directs the legal fellowship program, and provides leadership for HTI's strategic litigation. It's important to note that in 2019, Alyssa served as HCI's acting special counsel in Uganda's Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So she knows a lot about the situation in Uganda, and I'm going to turn it to her to tell you more.
Thanks, Meredith. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Everyone see that? All right, so thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. It's been really great to hear from our research team at John Jay and UDEL. We have had a really amazing team to work with on this study. I thought I'd start out today with just a little overview of the Human Trafficking Institute for those of you who aren't familiar. So HTI is an NGO that was founded by former federal prosecutors at the U.S. Department of Justice's Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit. And at any given time, our leadership has comprised former state and federal prosecutors, law enforcement, victim assistance coordination experts, legislative drafters, all with expertise in the anti-trafficking field. So that's just to say we do come to this space with a specialization in the prosecution component of the holistic framework for combating trafficking, which means we really rely on strong partnerships with other great organizations like UDEL that can move forward the critically important and intersecting prevention and protection components of this work. The model for anti-trafficking enforcement that we promote is victim-centered, it's trauma-informed, and it utilizes the multidisciplinary teams approach that facilitates the collaboration of police, prosecutors, and victim service providers, all of whom are specially trained and equipped to work on human trafficking cases. Our primary work is partnering with governments that want to improve their anti-trafficking enforcement and are dedicated to implementing a context-specific version of this model. So right now we're partnered with Belize and Uganda. And we've always envisioned these partnerships to be long-term investments rather than tied to a 2 or 3 year grant cycle. Our goal is to consult on the creation of the infrastructure, that is these specialized trafficking, anti-trafficking units and victim assistance coordination within police and prosecution offices, as well as to provide specialized training, tools, and resources for justice sector professionals in these spaces. And we do this by offering intensive academies, remote consultations, short-term tailored trainings, and by providing expert former prosecutors and law enforcement who co-office with our counterparts in Belize and Uganda to consult day in and day out on the fundamental strategies and approaches to anti-trafficking enforcement. In addition, since we are a US-based organization, we feel it's important to contribute to the anti-trafficking work happening domestically. So we do engage in research, policy work, advocacy, and strategic litigation in the United States. That said, we don't provide direct services to victims or survivors, and we aren't personally investigating and prosecuting cases. So we don't have the anecdotes or case studies that other organizations in the space have to demonstrate the impact of our work. And that's why it's always been a value of HTI to be data-driven and use data to show our impact. Domestically in the US, we prioritize data by publishing the only exhaustive review of every federal human trafficking prosecution, and also by publishing summaries of federal anti-trafficking enforcement efforts in every US state and territory, both resources that we created to fill gaps we'd identified in the US response to trafficking. In our partner countries, we measure our impact using data. And the first type that we use is criminal justice metrics. So how many investigations, prosecutions, victims identified. In fact, in Uganda, we're partnering with Liberty Shared, who some of you are probably familiar with, to build an information management system that the prosecutors who we partner with can use to collect this data from the field nationwide and routinely report on to key stakeholders. The second metric that we use for measuring impact is the tier placements assigned annually by the US Department of State as a measure of the success or failures of the collective efforts that we're a part of. And the final metric we use, which is most relevant here, is the prevalence of human trafficking. Over time, we ideally want to be able to see a measurable reduction in the prevalence of trafficking in the specific geographic regions and industries where we're focused. And of course, the study we're talking about here today took place in Kampala, Uganda. So a little bit about our work there. We've partnered with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution since 2017. I was there for a stint, as Meredith mentioned, prior to our current special counsel's arrival. So our study here is of particular interest to me. We helped to establish a designated human trafficking desk at the prosecutor's office. The photo on the bottom is Rachel Bicole, the designated prosecutor. She's graduating from an HTI Academy back in 2018 there. We also pushed for the creation of what is now the Victim Assistance Coordinator position within the prosecutor's office to help connect identified victims to available services. And beyond the prosecutor's office, we helped establish a human trafficking unit in the Criminal Investigations Division of the Ugandan Police Force. And we participate as a member of the coalition of local anti-trafficking NGOs, as well as a member of the National Interagency Task Force on Trafficking. And of course, essential part of our model is hiring an expert to co-office with our counterparts. So the guy in the middle of the top picture is our current special counsel, Tyler Dunman, who prosecuted trafficking at the state level in the US for many years. Since being there, he's helped designate prosecutors across the country to participate in centralized reporting of cases. And he provides specialized training for law enforcement and prosecutors nationwide, including consultations throughout the investigations and prosecutions of these cases. So I really think HTI's goals for funding a prevalence study in Uganda were threefold. First and foremost, as I mentioned, we want to use this baseline prevalence estimate as a way to measure the impact of our programming. So our hope is that when we measure prevalence again during the midpoint study and again at the endpoint study, we will see a reduction in the prevalence of trafficking in the geographic locations and industries where we're working. Our hope is that the qualitative interviews that Andrea discussed will help us understand how our programs might have impacted the changes in prevalence that we see. But the study isn't just about measuring our potential impact, it's also about informing and shaping our programming, our day-to-day operations. Having a sense of the scope of the problem is helpful for setting expectations about the time and resources that it's going to take, but also just for advocating and communicating about this issue with stakeholders who we interact with on a daily basis. Everyone wants to know the scope of the problem. So in that sense, it's just really helpful to have an accurate estimate. And the study has also revealed common fact patterns and trends for how human trafficking is happening in Kampala, which has already been helpful in training law enforcement how this crime is actually playing out. The study has also enabled us to identify gaps in victim protection, such as healthcare options for survivors and obstacles victims encounter to reporting their exploitation to authorities. And then, of course, the study may help identify victims from the pool of respondents who were each given a list of service providers. So if at some point they're able to and choose to report their exploitation, they have the information to report directly to the police unit trained to handle this type of case. Of course, you heard Mutaawe talk about challenges, and so identification of victims may or may not actually be an outcome here, but it is a possibility. Finally, we are so excited to share the findings of this research with our partners, both locally to help inform their interventions and internationally to hopefully progress the movement towards more accurate methodologies for measuring the prevalence of what's often a hidden crime. And that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. That helps provide some useful context. And thank you to all of the panelists. I'm going to ask all of the panelists to turn their cameras on because we have reached the very exciting Q&A portion of this panel. So I'm going to kick it off with a question of my own, which I'm going to ask Alyssa. And then I'm gonna interweave some of the questions from some of the audience as we go along. And if there's a lull, I have a surplus of questions I can ask everybody, so do not worry. So Alyssa, can you, I think it's additional helpful context to describe a little bit about why Kampala specifically in Uganda? And why did we pick those specific industries? So looking specifically at sex work and ultimately sex trafficking, in addition to forced begging, and children who are involved in forced begging and sex
Yeah, so although we do work nationwide in Uganda to address all types of trafficking, we chose to focus on a specific geographic area and specific industries in order to get the most accurate estimate possible. We learned that from a research standpoint, measuring prevalence across different industries and geographies does not necessarily result in the most accurate estimates because of how context specific the crime can be. So once we knew we wanted to limit the scope, it made sense to choose Kampala since it's where the prosecutors and UDEL are headquartered. And anecdotally, we'd also had reason to believe quite a few individuals were trafficked into Kampala from surrounding areas. And then we chose the industries that are representative of the types of cases that we see, that our special counsel sees and works with the prosecutors on. But intentionally, we chose to focus on domestic trafficking since it sometimes gets less attention in Uganda than transnational trafficking by labor recruitment agencies. And also, domestic trafficking does not present some of the investigative and prosecutorial challenges or complications associated with the transnational trafficking. I think you're on mute, Meredith.
I knew that was going to happen at least one time. Luckily, it was at the end. That was helpful context again, so thank you for that response. I just want to point out that if folks have additional questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. Next up, I've got a two-parter from a participant in that's listening in. I'm going to direct one question to one person, another to another. So first, I'm going to direct the first question to Kyle. In the study conducted, how was the selection of the survey participants decided? What was how did that work with regards to seeding and all of that?
Okay, if I recall correctly, the strategy that we used was to scatter the population, to scatter the sample seeds about the study population so that we can get an array of individuals coming from a variety of demographic profiles. This was to ensure that we were going to get ultimately a representative sample through the RDS sampling design with as few waves as necessary. So that was the strategy there. We wanted to avoid oversampling the more conspicuous individuals in the population, but rather try to take a somewhat representative sample right from the start. So that was the idea.
Basically, Mutaawe and his team identified individuals within certain hotspots, whether they were connected to UDEL in some way or they were kind of more known within the community as the initial respondents who then referred others. Is that correct, Mutaawe?
Yes, well, I think that's a correct way of looking at it. We basically when we went to the field, to the hotspots, we were able to identify at least the initial respondents who are more like seeds, and then we're able to identify those. Then after interviewing those seeds or the initial respondents, then they were able to each one of them got at least 3 coupons, and then they were able to take the coupons and give them out to those respondents whom they felt like were part or had similar characteristics like themselves. And then they're able, and so when someone's being referred for another interview, they come with a coupon. And so when the coupon comes back, it remains with the research assistant, and then the interview takes place. So we kept on recording the coupons that have gone out as seeds and the coupons that have also come back, from the different respondents. And then they are about to be able to have some bit of triangulated way of conducting the study.
And to that point, given Mutaawe, as you pointed out, this is a very transitory, both populations are fairly transitory, moving around a lot. There were definitely times where you came back to us and we were reviewing the data, since it was all collected electronically using tablets, where we had to pick new sampling areas because people were moving around and we weren't necessarily getting at the target populations that we had wanted. So doing this kind of research does require some flexibility on some level. The second part of that question, I'm going to direct actually to you, Mutaawe, and the person wanted to know, I know the results are not public yet, but at least the information that you learned and maybe to a degree shared with other partners, maybe some government officials, have there been any state interventions or any government intervention, or I'll even add NGO intervention to bring attention and assistance to the victims so far? Or is that going to come down the line when the findings are released?
Well, we did not want to wait for the victims to get assistance once the findings are released. I think what we've done so far as an organization, of course, working hand in hand with the Human Trafficking Institute who are based here in Kampala, we've been able to go back to the field, to the hotspots. We thought that we would really be able to, wanted to find as many respondents as possible, who needed immediate rescue and psychosocial support services. And we've been able to identify some of them who are still within those hotspots or the areas which we surveyed at the time. And some of them have expressed, of course, they need rehabilitation services, they need vocational skills training, they need economic empowerment, they need counseling. So some of them may want to go back to school. But I think the issue is that we wanted to bring it in a perspective whereby we're able to link them up to awareness sessions. We want to do a partnership, one with the Human Trafficking Institute, but also have some individuals from the police force who come and do some awareness capacity building sessions with some of these respondents and be able to inform them of the available services, whether in terms of rehabilitation, in case they want to seek justice, or in case they want to bring perpetrators to book, so that we're able to probably open up cases, and then some of those cases can be followed up legally in the best way that we can as far as the laws are concerned. But also I think most of them may want some psychosocial support and rehabilitation. And we've been able to support some of them as an organization, some of them, a few of them, but as of course working handy with other organizations and institutions. I know we've already done also a mapping, which has been done in conjunction with the Human Trafficking Institute, a mapping of civil society organizations, government, and other sector players who can come into play, who have services that some of the respondents may need, and therefore we may do referrals based on the services that these respondents may need. But given that we had to have a directory compendium of service providers that will be helpful going forward.
Thank you. I think it probably also highlighted some of the gaps in resources that also exist within the country that hopefully, shedding more light on, there'll be opportunities to build up some programming and things of that sort for both prevention and intervention. Speaking of law enforcement, I'm going to direct the next question to Andrea, because this is at least a little bit of an area that we've dug somewhat into particularly in the qualitative. But can you kind of describe overall what the experiences were of the respondents, what their interactions look like with law enforcement, and kind of whether law enforcement tends to be a first line of defense as far as who they go to seek help from?
Yeah, so there was, I would say that the minority of people reached out to law enforcement. There was not a lot of help seeking around, feeling like police was somebody that they could go to or feel comfortable going to, because many had negative experiences where they felt that they were being judged, and that there's such a stigma around sex work, and as well with forced begging, and selling of goods. So there was a lot of concern about going for that reason. But then in addition, their past experiences have been ones where they have been abused at the hands of police. They had been verbally abused by them, that they also were their customers in some cases. So, and that the police knew some of the traffickers, and that there were some connections there that they were concerned about. So there were a number of different levels and different reasons why they did not feel comfortable reaching out to the police. But there were some that did still, and that they received some basic help some didn't receive the help that they needed, but others did receive some support and help from the police. But it was maybe, I think it was like 20% of the respondents. And I think in terms of help seeking, they would normally go to individuals that they knew. There were also some organizations in Kampala that they felt comfortable going to, but for the most part, also with the kind of the nature of trafficking, where there are threats and concerns and about physical harm or emotional harm, or the loss of finances if they were to reach out to the police or anyone for help, that was also inhibited them from seeking help as well.
Thank you. And I think an extra layer of complication there is that, as you pointed out, a number of times family members were the ones who were trafficking the person. And, even in the worst case scenarios where there is a family member who's trafficking the person, there's a lot of abuse and exploitation. You would find a lot of victims say, I do not want my family member arrested. And so that also gives some level of hesitation from somebody to come forward and report who their trafficker is, because in many cases, and this is not unique to Uganda, this is worldwide, people don't want their family members ultimately prosecuted and incarcerated. So thank you for that response. There is another question here. Somebody did a little bit of homework. Maybe they knew this already or did it while we were on presenting, but they point out that we interviewed many young folks, and I will say that the population for the forced begging and sales was specific to youth, so those under the age of 18. So that's why you will see a larger sample there. May also speak to the population, though, of the country. 70% are below 30 years of age out of 42 million. So a good thing to keep in mind. The question, though, is more females appear to respond to the survey and possibly the interviews as well. Are females more prone to trafficking in Kampala? Is it the nature of the industries we focused on, do you think? Or do you think that it is a gender thing, that more women are more vulnerable, or are they more likely to come forward and participate in research? I don't know, Mutaawe, maybe you have a response, but if other folks have some thoughts on that, feel free to chime in.
Yes, I think as far as this study is concerned, you find that when you look at the category of sex trafficking, you find that it's more females who are in that category of sex trafficking, and probably that's why you find that there are more females who are being covered in this category, or being more females, because compared to the sex trafficking and forced begging or forced selling, you find that we had more respondents for sex trafficking compared to forced begging or forced selling of goods. But when you also look at forced selling and forced selling and begging, they will find that there are more boys who are involved in this kind of trade. So, so when you look at the statistics going forward, in as far as the study is concerned, if you covered more sex trafficking respondents, it would mean that we would have more females compared to the males. But of course, I also remember that Andrea, when she was presenting, said that there are some respondents who were both in sex trafficking, but also at the same time involved in forced begging. So there are also those kind of crossovers that are to go into see in the study. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that we did have some in the, I think in the end it requires more research, honestly, because I feel like they may be a more hidden population that may be much more challenging to get to as well, in terms of young men or men who experience sex trafficking. We did have some interviews and some surveys, and for the interviews that we had, which again, just a handful, there was a lot of information in them that really indicated that it exists. It's just much more hidden and controlled and located in different places. And so I think there's going to be need for additional research around that.
I think to that point, and that goes worldwide. I think that when it comes to male victimization, particularly of sexual abuse or any kind of sexual victimization, it's very much underreported. And there are a host of reasons out there for that. But, you know, I think with this research, and Mutaawe and his team was able to build enough rapport within the community and these responses that we did get a handful of young men who were either engaged in sex work and were sex trafficked, or even were sexually assaulted, you know, when they were being forced to beg and sell on the streets. And they did come forth and disclose that information. You know, it was very brave of them to do so. But I think that it tends to be the norm, unfortunately, in many countries, including the United States, where, you know, boys and men coming forward to disclose any kind of sexual victimization is underreported. So if folks are thinking about research ideas and what to move forward with, that's definitely an area that could use a lot more research and information. I think that is it for questions. I will let Salome chime in if there was anything additional. Hold on. Okay. This might gear towards Mutaawe and Alyssa a little bit. What kind of public policies do you suggest should be, I guess, instituted, drafted to address this type of trafficking? And what do you think? And do you think that the government is willing to invest in them to mostly prevent trafficking? So I guess what is needed to both prevent this type of trafficking, but also from an intervention standpoint, what else is needed? And maybe we can end on that question. So I don't know who wants to chime in first.
Mutaawe, do you want to go first?
Okay, fine. I think in Uganda we have a law. We have a Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act 2009. So we already have a law which is supposed to really help us in terms of prevention, in terms of prohibiting, but also having some penalties in as far as some of these crimes are concerned or have been committed. But I think what we see at basically is an issue of enforcement, but also it's also an issue of resource constraints. But also sometimes you see an issue of where people even lose trust in the different duty bearers and even law enforcement where they should go for support. So really you find that the law is there and supposed to be a deterrent, to act as a prevention measure in as far as preventing trafficking is concerned. But some of these crimes will continue to be seen and continue to be committed. But I think what we need to do is that if they're committed, can we see some of these cases being taken to courts of law and probably see justice being done? And probably when people see some of these cases going to all the way to courts of law, and we see some of the cases who have been convicted, and probably we could be able to see some bit of reduction in the long run. But as we see here, as we see now, really we just government investing resources. Well, I think that would be really. I haven't seen yet so much investment in that line, but at least I know that they have fully fledged directorates which help in terms of investigation. They help in terms of following up some of these cases in case they're brought, and in case they are brought to their attention. But of course, I also know that working together with Mind Trafficking Institute office here in Kampala, they've been able to do some of this work quite well. But I think there could be a few challenges here and there, but we believe that we can be able to accomplish and see some of these things being dealt with in the long run.
Thank you. I think you raise a good point. There are a lot of countries that technically have laws and policies on the books, but enforcement is a big issue there, and transparency and accountability. So I think that is definitely key. And as you again pointed out, resources, having the resources, knowing what the problem is, but then able to address that problem through programming and practice, and hopefully leading to the arrests of traffickers and prosecutions all takes money. So that's also important. Alyssa, did you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I second everything Mutaawe said. I think it'll be great to see the results and to be able to share those, like I mentioned, with our partners who will do a lot more of the policy work and advocating for change, especially in the prevention and protection components. But I do think that funding for the human trafficking unit in the investigations division, the criminal investigations division, would be a great first step. All of the challenges with reporting, I think a lot of them could be addressed if there was funding for that unit, so that the first responders are those who are trained, who are equipped to, and who are trustworthy, who are going to get the report to the right people, who are connected with the victim service providers. I think that would be a great first step. That unit has been in existence for quite a while without having its own stream of funding. And I'll also say that the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act, the law in Uganda that Mutaawe mentioned, is a really good law, and there is a movement to repeal it and replace it with something else. And hopefully this study will show that, like Mutaawe said, that's not what's needed. What's needed is implementation of the existing law.
Excellent. An excellent point to end on, which is what we're going to do. So I'm gonna, before I hand it over to Louisa to provide instructions and a wrap up, I just want to thank the panelists for their presentations and their responses and all the hard work that they are doing and continue to do. And to all of you for tuning in and listening. And we're excited, we're all excited to get the findings out. So keep an eye out again, later this summer, early fall. And Louisa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for guiding the conversation so elegantly. And thank you too to our panelists for the very interesting conversation. And also for the gift for transporting us today to Uganda. Thank you so much. Hemos cerrado este primer día. Muchísimas gracias a todas y a todos por su activa participación en todos nuestros canales. Ya lo saben, en el chat se compartirá la liga para que nos ayuden a evaluar esta sesión y para registrar su asistencia. Nuevamente les recuerdo que deberán asistir a por lo menos el 60% de las sesiones para obtener un certificado de participación. Les esperamos el día de mañana tempranito en nuestra primera sesión a las 8 de la mañana, hora Ciudad de México, para ahora transportarnos hasta Asia y el Pacífico. Esperamos darles la bienvenida. Les deseo una muy linda tarde o noche donde quiera que se encuentren. Mi nombre es Luisa Sánchez Iriarte y ha sido un placer ser su anfitriona el día de hoy. Muchísimas gracias y hasta mañana.